Welcome back. My name is Troy Vermillion, and I'm the host of your favorite technology podcast, What the Tech. Today, we'll be discussing the prevalence of workplace bullying and harassment in 2023, as well as the resources available to those who are targeted. We'll also explore what employers can do to combat this issue and how individuals can protect themselves. Now, be sure to tune in every week for more great discussions about the latest trends in technology and how they're impacting our lives. If you have any topics or questions that you would like us to discuss here on What the Tech, please reach out to me via email, comments below, or social media. Let's go. Joining us today is my friend Kristi Chaney. She's a professional HR leader who has had an all too common experience with workplace bullying and harassment. Let's hear her story and what she has to say, because I'm really glad that she can be here with us today to discuss her workplace bullying experience, which is a very common issue in many workplaces. It can take many forms, from verbal or physical abuse to unwanted sexual attention or inappropriate comments. Now, it can also manifest itself through gossip and belittling of individuals' work performance, withholding or manipulating resources, to outright exclusion. So I want to welcome you to the show, Kristi. Thanks for coming on today.
Hi.
Hi.
Happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I told you a little bit, I gave you a little bit of a warning before we got on here that I was going to hit you with something quirky and funny. Like I said, it's nothing too silly, but I always like to do an icebreaker to get to know you, right? And so I just wanted to ask you, if you were kind of writing your own narrative into a show that you maybe watch or enjoyed, which one would it be and why? And if you had to pick a character, which character do you think you would fit into?
So you know Will and Grace?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I'm a conservative non-redhead version of Grace. I'm a little neurotic sometimes, little all over the place, big emotions. Hopefully not as dopey on occasion, but yeah, I've had my moments. I also run into doors quite often. I don't know why I have a problem with spatial recognition, so I end up with these bruises. I have no idea where they came from, so that's probably me.
Yeah, that's great. You know, that was a fun show. The two of them. I don't know how many seasons it went on, but I think that a lot of people related with those two quirky ones in the way that they kind of interacted. So I think that's a really good one. You know, if it was for me, there's a few that kind of come to mind, and you know, I think of some like Seinfeld, and I think of Friends, and I think of like all these really good ones. But one of the more recent ones that I really enjoy watching, I don't know that I could see myself in it, other than the fact I am a kind of a closet geek. I'm not like a physicist or something like that. Is Big Bang, and my wife and I watch it together. The other one I could totally see myself in is The Office. As
I was gonna say, you are Jim from The Office.
Oh, I'm Jim. Yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the Office. I'm a huge fan of that, and I do think Jim is probably the best character. Just the shenanigans that he and Dwight are doing all the time are fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
But
they have a love-hate relationship.
They do. I almost didn't make it through the first season though. Like, I had friends that told me, "Hey, watch it." I watched the first season. I said, "This is horrible." But then the second season, like, it actually started to make sense, and the character development was so much better. The writing was so much better. I almost couldn't get away from the fact that I didn't like Michael in the first whole season, and so
he's very unlikable.
He was super
unlikable. And then he becomes lovable.
Yes,
at a point.
Yes,
like an that poor guy type of a lovable. Just totally ignorant, lovable guy. Yeah.
No, he did grow on me for sure. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. So the thing I'd like to start off with today specifically around this topic is a little bit about your story and experience. And I don't think we have to go all the way back, but I do think I'd like people to get to know you a little bit about like kind of where you come from. You moved around a bit in the west side of the United States, and so I think you've lived in different cultures, and that probably had some impact on just kind of the way that you viewed things, and probably some of the biases and feelings you had about what your experience was. So I say give a little bit of that background before you jump into your story, because I think
Okay.
it's impactful. I think there's a lot of people that have experienced similar things to you and not known what to do. So why don't we start there?
Okay. Sounds good. Well, Troy, I actually was raised in the Pacific Northwest. So I was raised in Washington State. That's where I spent my formative childhood years, as it were. I've lived in a couple of different states. I went to school at BYU, so I ended up moving to Utah. Was raised LDS, and aside from that, I did a couple of internships. I had an internship in Florida, an internship in Colorado Springs. I was a communications major at one point in time, and so I did a quick summer internship at both those places. I wrote for the Gazette the summer of, I think it was, oh my gosh, 2002. I am so old. The other day I calculated, and I was like, oh, how many years since I graduated from college? That's just trippy. That's just weird. Um, but I always ended up back in Utah. My parents relocated to Boise for my dad's job in my 20s. I always keep coming back to Utah. I don't know. It just kind of keeps sucking me in. And then in 2013, a couple friends and I decided to just up and move to LA. We just wanted to try it. My mom's originally from LA. My dad's from the Bay Area. I'm kind of West Coast all the way around. So I was there until the pandemic. And to tie that in with my work background, I told you I was a communications major. I have a Bachelor of Arts from BYU in print journalism communication. So I was a writer. And there was a point where I decided that that was not for me, mostly because most writers are poor and I did not want to be poor. So I wanted a little bit better for myself. So I started trying some things. I was a bit of a nomad, not just in life, but also in my work history. I kind of started out in project management, worked there for a little while. And then my first job when I moved to LA was as a recruiter. And that was kind of my foray into HR. I loved what I did. I didn't love the numbers part of it, but I loved matching people with jobs. And then I learned more. And then I got to work for companies like Disney and Warner Brothers, Kaiser. Just I was all over the place. And for people who don't know, LA has a lot of contract work. So you have the opportunity to try a number of different fields just to kind of see what works for you. Obviously, a lot of people go in there to try to get entertainment. And then they try it and they decide that they don't like it, or they try and they decide that they love it. So they keep going in or they find something else. So LA is built on contractors for a lot of different reasons. But so through that arena, I got to try my hand in a lot of different areas. And each one I tried kind of, I found this love for recruiting and project management and just helping employees. And I mean, let's be honest, HR hasn't really been a thing until the last 10, 15 years, maybe.
Yeah, not
I mean, when I graduated in school from 2002, it was not a thing. It was people who did payroll.
yeah,
You know, I didn't even know what that was.
it was very tactical in its nature, and I think that we've brought over the last, call it the decade, there's so much more about HR that we're seeing. It has a lot more color than it ever had,
Hmm.
right?
And to your point, with regards to color, it's become a lot more prominent, especially through a pandemic, especially through changing social issues and times. All of those things that owners and presidents, they're like, I don't want to deal with this. I want to run a company. I don't want to deal with company culture. I don't want to deal with recruiting. I don't want to fill jobs. I don't want to have these employee relations conversations. Suddenly, HR has been thrust into the forefront as a position that needs a seat at the table in order to take some of the stuff off the plate of the chiefs, because that's not what they want to do. Most of them, they're not trained in that. That's not their area of expertise. And suddenly HR has been tasked with all of these things that at one point were non-existent, and now they're essential to the operations of a company, whether it's It's a young kid coming out of college, and they're investigating what their next step in their professional journey career is going to be. And they're actually looking at companies that support certain causes. How do they treat them? What are my perks? It's not just like it was in the 90s where, or 80s or anything like that. We're looking at a time where people move from job to job every couple of years. My grandfather worked at the same company, I'm pretty sure, for 50 years. People don't do that anymore. They, I mean, on very rare occasions they might, but people don't stick in the same jobs. They're always looking for a better opportunity. They're looking for more work-life balance. They're working for being treated better. Somewhere that's going to actually value them as an employee as opposed to just a body in a seat. And that has really happened within the last 10 to 15 years for sure. The pandemic pushed it even farther forward with employees working from home and employers scrambling to find the right people who can work from home. Um, Obviously, changing over to be able to make everything possible because they weren't allowed to go in the office. So they're like, okay, how can we continue to do business and not lose profits all at the same time? Getting everybody moved over to that area of thinking. And then they called it the Great Resignation for a reason because people were rethinking. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm home with my kids. I'm home with my dog. I haven't been home during the day. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know that this was possible. So suddenly it kind of made them rethink everything they thought about the work, the working day, the regular 9 to 5, the rather Monday through Friday. It started with Gen Xers, but has really been pushed through millennials and Gen Zers. And you're seeing kind of the pendulum swing back a little bit with everything settling down, people going back into the office. But I think the hybrid work model is here to stay. And part of the hybrid and people moving jobs right now, it's a little bit of a tougher economy, but people are still looking for somewhere that's going to treat them well. People are still looking for somewhere where they can be valued, where they can have work-life balance, where they can take their kids to soccer practice, where they can go to their yoga places, and where they have time in the morning to get up and do whatever they need to do and go to their doctor's appointments. Even though the pendulum's swinging back a little bit, those items are still in the forefront of people's minds. I don't know that they're going to go away totally. I think the equilibrium between what an employer needs and what an employee needs, I think it's going to even out, but employers are not going to shush what an employee wants so quickly anymore. And I just finished a couple of offers and packages for our company. I work for PZ Printing. I'm the HR manager here. And I can tell you there was some negotiation. They said, this is what I want. And there was some back and forth. So employers have to listen if they want the good employees, the ones that are going to stay around and put their companies to the forefront of their field.
Well,
and part of that is treating their employees well.
Yeah, and I think you have experienced kind of both sides of that. I know that it's a pretty good working environment for you today, but in the past that has not always been the case. And so I think you have a unique perspective where you can kind of contrast both of those. And honestly, I do think a lot of people have had similar experiences as what you had shared with me previously. So let's kind of talk about what that looked like,
Okay.
because it wasn't that, you even identified as somebody that was in a toxic environment. You really hadn't identified it. It was that somebody, had said, hey, there's protection for somebody like you when you've gone through something like this, right? And even with your HR experience and background, you didn't even self-identify the way that you probably should have. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let me kind of walk me through your journey in that
Okay.
process.
Well, I appreciate this opportunity because I feel like there's a lot of employees who, like you said, they don't realize that there even are opportunities. And that's really what got me into HR in the first place, was after I went through a couple of these experiences, I kind of thought to myself that other people need to be aware. There are so many options out there for people, but they have no idea. And many times the employers don't take the time to explain it, whether they don't have the time or whether they don't want to or whatever. Employees do not know their options. Sometimes they wake up in the morning and they're just like, I have to put up with this. And they dread going to work. And that's how I felt. My story goes back to when I was working for a hospital chain on the West Coast, and I'm going to keep names out of this, but I was a coordinator at one of those hospitals, and I had a good working relationship with my coworkers, and then something changed, and I did not know what, and I had no idea. And it turns out when I found out what had happened, I was dumbfounded that that was the reason that everything had changed, because I had had nothing to do with that particular incident. But my director had been told something that I had supposedly done. And so she started to treat me differently. It was almost like that. It was almost a flick of the switch. And I was in one day and everything was just changed. Everything was done. This person, would not pay attention when I was presenting. This person would get mad at me publicly and throw things at me, or at least toss in a very aggressive way, um, things in my direction. I wasn't allowed to ask questions without feeling stupid. I, I was made to feel like anything I did was not up to standards, when before everything that I did was great and praiseworthy. And it was like I couldn't do anything right. I remember sitting and making a presentation on a site that I put together for the hospital, and her head was down the entire time. She was looking at her phone, she wasn't paying any attention. I was trying to present this site, and not once did this person look up at all to even acknowledge me. And I had put hours and hours and hours into this site, and that was the kind of reception I got. I was left out of meetings. I was belittled in front of my coworkers. Um, and I started seeing a therapist because I hated going to work. I did not know what was wrong. And when I found out why she said that things had changed, I was just, like I said, I was flabbergasted. I For something that I didn't even do. And had this person come and talk to me, we could have talked it out. But because they made an assumption, that was an example to me of how quickly this person could change their mind on something. And what's weird is that I had seen this person do it to other people. I had heard the cries behind closed doors, and I just wanted to stay out of the way. I was worried about my own job. I liked what I was doing. I wanted to learn more. And then I became the target. And then when everything changes when you are the target. Everything changes when somebody's attitude changes towards you. Um, I remember many nights going home and just sobbing and just being disgusted and feeling sick. I didn't like going in to work. I mean, it was just weird. It was like everyone could park in this one closer area to the place everybody else but me could park there. It was very obvious to anybody that I was being singled out. I went to get help. I would notate what happened. I actually I still have that notebook actually, where I made all of the individual notes about various things that had happened in the day throughout a time period. I took it to her boss, who basically told me, "You have a decision to make. Are you going to just let this ruin you and your career, or are you going to take responsibility for your actions and just fight through it?" And that's what I was told. I went to this person numerous times and didn't get any assistance. Um, and then the pandemic happened. So I took some time off. I went to go stay with my parents, who retired and now live in Utah, until we figured out where this virus was going, what was going on. I had some health issues, so I wanted to, nobody knew anything at that time. So I was living in a small one-bedroom apartment with my little dog. And for those of you who don't know, LA was shut down very hard. I mean, even the boarding, the daycare for animals, they wouldn't let them operate. So had I stayed, it would have been a very lonely and depressing experience if I'd stayed over there. So I decided for my own sanity, my own well-being, that at least if I was going to be quarantined, it was going to be with my parents, with my family, where I had options and not everything was shut down and not everybody was scared. So I stayed a couple months with them. I even filed, while I was there, I filed a complaint with corporate HR, who did an investigation, and they found that there was wrongdoing, but I was never made aware of any consequences. And so they actually brought in a third party. I told them my story. I had numerous witnesses, and I was told that they found ways for improvement for this person. But I don't know what happened. And when I came back in June of 2020, because you have to make a decision, because I was still paying for an apartment, I still had to figure out where I was going to be long term. Nothing had changed. Nothing had happened. Um, she was very cold to me, but she did limit her communication. I had to do everything right, otherwise I was going to be nitpicked um, incessantly. And I put up with it for a little while. I actually pulled a coworker aside and explained my side to her, and I said, "Look, this is partly why I've been gone. This is what's going on. Just be careful," because it seemed like they were getting close, and I didn't want what happened to me to happen to other people.
Right.
Come July, I'm still kind of wading through things, and I got yelled at very loudly for something I didn't even know that I needed to know. And I was shocked. I My stomach was in knots. I hadn't been eating very well. Like I actually had some physical issues because of this. Um, your body's a funny thing because it has a way of physically manifesting the problems inside. And you can actually develop physical problems because of all of this tension and all this toxicity and all of these things that are happening. Um, and I just remember shaking my head thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this? I don't need to do this. So I went to the front desk to take care of something, and I happened to notice that there was a job opening with my title that was being worked on by the receptionist. And it was at that point that I took a lunch. I went downstairs, I went outside, and I just broke down. I cried to the birds that were sitting next to me, and I just remember thinking, I can't do this anymore. This is not worth it. My sanity is worth more than this. I I am worth more than this. And that was the day that I decided to go back on leave indefinitely for the sake of my health. I called my doctor. And for those of you who don't know, California has weird rules when it comes to FMLA and getting approval and whatnot. So in some ways, it's a little bit easier if you have the medical backing of your physician. And my doctor knew what I was going through. So I called the doctor and I said, I can't go back to work. I can't do this. So we agreed that I would go back on leave. And I walked around with a sinking feeling, knowing that that was going to be the last time I was going to be in that building.
Mm-hmm.
I went to go say goodbye to someone in the in one of the wings who was actually over the employees' well-being. And I mean, my eyes were red. There were tears streaming down my face. It was pretty obvious that I was not happy. But I'd made friends everywhere in this building. Everybody except this person liked me. And I will never forget that I went in to say goodbye to this manager friend of mine. And this person was like, I've seen your director do this to other people. And this person said, you have options. And I said, I don't know what those options are. When it comes to workers' comp, you only ever think about physical injuries.
Right.
Did I twist my ankle? Did I get a back injury? Did something happen at work to cause this? You don't think about mental injuries. You don't think about anxiety and depression and these things that come up from work. And so this manager and I sat down and talked, and I told him a brief synopsis of the story of what I'd been through for almost a year. And this manager said, I think you qualify for disability and workers' comp under mental duress. And I said, what is that? So he sat down and explained this to me in detail. And he said, no, I can't guarantee that you're going to get approved, but I think that you have a good case. Plus, I have seen this director do this to other people. And he said, if you want, I will get this paperwork started right now. So we did. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, well, what do I have to lose if I'm not ever coming back anyway? Does it really matter? And that kicked off a series of events that took me through the workers' comp process in California. Keep in mind, I've never claimed workers' comp for anything before in my life, so this was new to me. Um, I was seen by the occupational health doctor, Ahmed Akhel, that was contracted with the hospital to evaluate these types of cases. And I explained my situation. I said, please don't make me go back. I don't care if you think this is crazy or if you think this just is completely Looney Tunes, but you can't make me go back. I can't do this for my own health. And I just cried all the way through. And the doctor said, I'm not going to make you go back. I see that you can't go back. So I had all of these records that proved that I'd been under this duress for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
So they submitted my workers' comp claim. And it took a few months to get things sorted out, but in January of 2021, that was when I officially moved from Los Angeles back to Utah, when I made the decision. And I got a call from the workers' comp office, and they said your claim has been approved. And then they tried to settle. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I didn't even know it would happen. I didn't even think that this was a case. And it was a long road. I had to go meet with a state assessment coordinator. I actually had to go back to Los Angeles during the fall of 2020, and you sit in a room with this person. They have you fill out documents to see if you're crazy or to see if you're faking it or anything. And I told my story from top to bottom to this assessor, and I didn't know what she was going to say. Apparently, there's some kind of a scale in California, like if you can prove you've been injured over 50%, because mental health cases are harder to prove than
Sure.
obviously like a broken rib or a bone or something. So they rate you on this scale, and depending on all of your documents and all of your background and the story that you tell, they determine where you are on this scale. And if you can prove that you were injured over 51%, they will approve your case. But obviously, that's really hard to prove. So I didn't know how this was going to work out. So I get this call in January of 2021 saying that my case had been approved and they tried to settle me. And I was excited. I was like, oh, good. I'm so excited I could just walk away. But during the whole process in fall of 2020, I met a great psychologist who referred me to a fantastic workers' comp attorney. And in the state of California, you do not have to pay for a workers' comp attorney. They get a percentage of whatever the settlement is,
Right.
assuming you win.
Yeah.
So I hadn't even thought that that was an option. It didn't even occur to me. Again, I didn't know any of these things. This is why there's a special certificate just for California HR laws, because California is so weird, and in that case, it benefited me. Um, but I actually reached out to this attorney. It was kind of by the grace of God that this all happened, or the grace of the higher power, because I signed the paperwork and I put it in the mailbox, and the mail wasn't going out that day or something. And I thought about it, and I was like, I kind of want to talk to this attorney first. So it hadn't gone out yet. So I reached in and I grabbed it and I pulled it back, and I opened it up, And I called the attorney that had been recommended to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, this is my case. This is my story. This is what they're offering me. And he said, Kristi, you can't sign that. You cannot sign this. And I said, what do you mean I can't sign it? And he said, well, if you want to, we can see how far it goes, but let's kind of let's hold the brakes. I don't remember exactly what happened after that, but I ended up sending it back out. It did go to the adjudicator, and then I got a call from the judge's office in February saying that your case has been stopped. And I said, why was it stopped? And they said, because we think that there's more to this. We think that you're being undervalued. Your case is being undervalued. So essentially what they were saying is, based on the evidence that we are seeing here, they owe you a lot more.
Yeah.
And that's when the attorney and I got a little bit more serious. So it was stopped once, and then it was stopped again by this judge who wouldn't sign it. So that's when I got my attorney involved, who was fantastic. And we went through everything from top to bottom. And I told him just about everything in my story that I had to give. And when the people who handle the workers' comp claims for this hospital, when they found out that it had been stopped, they came back to me directly, like within a couple of days, and said, okay, we'll double the offer. And I went back to my attorney and said, they just doubled their offer. He said, don't take it. So they were trying to sweep it under the rug and get it gone.
Right.
And I mean, I've never had this type of case before. I've never hired a lawyer before. So this was all new to me. But he's like, don't sign that. Don't you dare sign that. And I said, okay. So he went back to them and said, this is what we want. This is her case. It's already been approved. This is all the evidence. This is what we want. And their attorney came back and said, okay, if she wants to settle, this is what we'll do. And in June of 2021, it was closed. I got the settlement and it was done. And I haven't looked back since. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. And I've learned a lot since then about the difference between bullying, harassment, and anything in between.
I have a lot of questions, but I want to kind of come back to your emotional state and what this puts you through, because I would argue, right, and I think I actually agree with California on this one, because I have seen this time and time again. I have experienced this from people, leaders that I've been under that have put excruciating like pressure on people unjustly to do things that were nearly impossible to do. And I've heard them scream, yell, cuss, point the finger, point out people. And I think it's completely unacceptable. But, here we are. We've got a regulation inside of the workers' comp law that, unbeknownst to you, exists, right? That not necessarily protected you, but got you due, um, compensation for something that you experienced. I'm curious, through this whole process, just mentally, I know that you were under a lot of pressure, but like emotionally, how did you process all of that? I mean, it sounds to me like you were seeing a counselor and doing things, and then kind of talk about that current state, and then talk about now, like, what did it take to get you over that? Because I know that you didn't look back, but you probably stayed in counseling for a while to kind of get through and process all the things that happened to you, which arguably were not of your fault, right?
Well, remember the timing. So therapists were in short supply and everything was
Absolutely.
being done over the phone. And I had just moved, so I probably should have continued counseling. I did do a little bit of virtual counseling from my therapist in Los Angeles, but it's just hard. It's just not the same. It's just a different way of doing things. Emotionally, it put me through the ringer on a personal level, because before all this happened, this person and I were actually good friends. And I mean, friends, working colleagues, we got along very well. I got her a Christmas gift, she got me a Christmas gift. Like, we had a personal relationship, we had a personal friendship. And so that part was hard. That part was really hard, to think that I felt betrayed. I felt like this person knows me. She knows my work ethic. She knows what I do, what I would and would not do. Was I perfect? No, absolutely not. Nobody is. But I consider her my mentor in certain respects. And to lose that, and to think that somebody would be so quick to dismiss you because they heard something without coming to you and talking to you, especially after knowing how you do things and working with you in such close proximity for so long, that part hurt more than anything. And I can't tell you what I felt when I saw my job title up on the open requisition screen. Like, that was like a kick in the gut.
Yeah.
Kick in the gut might have hurt less. That's when it all kind of fell apart for me. Um, so it did take a while. It took a while to be able to look back and recognize that was not you, that was the other person, and realizing that you cannot control other person. I think especially as women in the workplace, I mean, I can't account for everybody, but we tend to take all the blame on ourselves. We just do. It's our nature. It's in our DNA. We take the ownership, and especially as a responsible person, I do. I thought about, and I was like, oh well, only if I hadn't done this, or only if I'd done that. Was, I mean, it was kind of like an abusive emotional relationship. If you think about two people in a relationship, and one is getting hammered all the time and they keep making excuses for the other one, you can have abusive emotional relationships at work.
Oh, of
You
course.
absolutely can.
Yeah.
And those are just as hard to get over as the personal relationships, because work is part of your identity. Most people tie themselves to what they do. They get a certain amount of pride and joy, and um, just enjoying and loving what it is they do once they found something that they love to do. And that was taken away for a little while. I doubted myself in every respect. I wondered if this is something I still wanted to do. I don't know. I think the hardest part about that was letting go of the personal relationship.
Yeah.
I never even told her goodbye. I went in one weekend, cleared out all my stuff, and that was it.
Well,
I
why would you though? I mean, that just that would yeah, it's not for you to do that. I mean, the reconciliation probably wasn't likely, but at the same time, it's probably easier not to interact with that person if they're going
yeah,
to treat you that way. And I as somebody who's struggled with depression and seen it close hand with my, like my mother was very depressed growing up, and she had a lot of reasons to be. Just to be completely honest, it'd been kind of a rough go for her. But seeing that firsthand, and what the impact of just mental abuse and other things can have on somebody, whether it's in the work environment or if it's in the home environment, it's excruciating. Like, and it's unacceptable in a work environment. We should never have carte blanche opportunity to treat other people in that capacity, uh, anyway, but with respect, right? And for somebody to play these sorts of games with you, where you throwing things at you, or not paying attention to what you've got going on, and certainly the not addressing if they have a problem that they're concerned about, uh, and bringing that to you in a respectful way. Those are all things that I've seen. I've seen those in the work environment, right? And you really got to experience that. And not everybody, their story ends with retribution. In most cases, it ends with them either leaving, in a worse state than they got there, and or losing their job. And so nobody should have to feel that way. And I totally respect you for coming on here and sharing that, because that was very personal, and so
you
forth. So
know,
yeah, go
while you
ahead.
were talking, it just occurred to me. We did have one conversation 6 months before I left, and this is when I finally found out why
Mm,
she changed. And she looked at me and she said, I'm actually surprised you're still here, which to me communicated that she was trying to push me out. So instead of dealing with me and talking to me like a respected colleague, she was going to make my life miserable until I just quit.
Yeah.
Eventually, I did move on, but I'm not that much of a wimp that I'm just going to walk out. I had a job to do. So, and I didn't know if I was naive and thought that I could fix the relationship or even just prove that I wasn't this person. But I was shocked when she told me that, just because it's like, wow, you did this intentionally. This
Right.
was an intentional thing.
Yeah.
So that little part will stick with me forever.
Yeah, I mean, especially for somebody who's committed to the job, committed to the cause, you had a lot of really good relationships there that you were trying to hold on to. And why wouldn't you, right? Because those were solid. And to be there and to have her say, well, it could be a he or a she, right? For that matter, it really doesn't matter for them to say, well, I'm surprised you're still here. Because when you talk about California specifically, and other states are like this too, to terminate somebody can be very difficult, right? You have to prove cause for doing that. And so it sounds to me like her goal was to get you to quit by creating a toxic work environment,
Yep.
by targeting you in ways that, first of all, are abusive, and second of all, are probably unfair to whatever it is that you did. If you made one mistake or you had a comment or things like that, to be abusive, intentionally abusive, that is unacceptable in my mind. And I do think that people like yourself telling your story, leaders in HR making a difference, changing the culture, doing something about bullying when you hear about it, all of those things are going to move us closer to a workplace that is more inviting, more productive, conducive of the success we all want. And so let's talk about that for a second, because your story, I think, is really impactful. But I think what you did with that and some of the things that you've kind of done in sharing your story and ideas, I think is also powerful, right? Because you're not staying stuck there. Like you could get stuck there. You could just be upset about the situation, but you said you moved on, right? And now you're sharing your story to help inspire others. And I want to say thank you for coming on here and doing that. But like, let's talk about that now. Let's like, what's the next step? Because you've moved forward.
Mhm.
Maybe you haven't forgot about it, but you've moved forward. And so tell me a little bit about what you're doing today.
So in 2020, during my leave, I took the PHR and I passed because I knew that I was going to need an additional help to make that jump from coordinator to whether it be business partner or what have you. And now I'm a HR manager at a small printing company that I love in Utah. Um, I think what was really important for me, and I hope that other people pay attention to this, is recognizing what's harassment, recognizing what's bullying, what you have to put up with, and what you don't. So a lot of people get those two terms tied together or crossed over. They get them confused. And I just want to spend a minute to talk about the difference between the two, because let's face it, there's just mean people. They're just everywhere, right? There are just people who are never going to be happy no matter what you do. Um, and maybe they're the most productive people in the company and that's why they're there. I don't know. Um, but I can tell you that I looked up the definition of workplace bullying, and workplace bullying refers to the following: repeated mistreatment, abusive conduct that is threatening, intimidating, or humiliating, work sabotage, verbal abuse, something that creates a hostile work environment, exposure to continued harassment, discrimination, or intimidation that makes it difficult to complete your job. That is a definition of workplace bullying. Now, harassment, as we all know, that's a legal thing. So that refers to somebody's sexual orientation, their race, their color, their religion, any of those things. That's when you cross into harassment territory, and those can actually be taken up by the EEOC. Those can be reported, and I'm hoping that those are lessening as time goes on, because as those become more transparent, especially with social media and sharing and everything, I'm hoping that the harassment part goes away more quickly. I mean, we know it's out there, but for the most part, I think the audience knows what harassment is. But what they don't understand is a toxic environment and what can be done about it. I guarantee anyone out there has probably been in at least one toxic environment during their work life. It just happens. There's just people out there who, for whatever reason, they're not happy, and people who are managers who shouldn't be. And people don't pay attention to the people that they're promoting. So I wish I could say it was different, but it's not. But bullying can include, and this is important, consistent rudeness or disrespect. And we're not saying the occasional blow up, which also is not okay, but just on a regular basis, are you being disrespected? Are you being talked down to? Um, harsh language. Harsh language can also be considered harassment if it kind of floats over into the sexual harassment category. What are they joking about? So beware of that. Physical touching, that's bullying. Suggestive remarks, also harassment. Visibly sexually suggestive photos. I mean, I hope that everybody knows that this is all harassment stuff, but it's also considered bullying. If people are doing that in front of you, you're being bullied, and it's not okay. So that's when harassment and bullying are kind of tied together. Um, and this next one really got to me because this is so important. Being isolated on purpose, excluded from meetings and work-related activities. If somebody is intentionally prohibiting you from being able to do your job by excluding you from meetings and not giving you the tools that you need, which I've had in other jobs too, where people took me off of tools that I needed to do my job, that is bullying. That is preventing you from doing your job. Purposefully ignoring, avoiding, or not paying attention to somebody. If you're in a room, and I'm not saying that you have to be best friends with everybody, but if you're in a meeting and somebody is being intentionally excluded from that meeting, even though they're sitting there and they want to ask a question, nobody's paying attention to them, that's bullying. Tampering with someone's personal belongings, coercion, threatening, either overt or veiled behavior, deceit or repeated lying in a person's way. Those are just a few examples of bullying and what can happen and what can create a toxic environment. Um, so, and I want to hone in on the difference between harassment and bullying, which is again is interesting because bullying can become harassment depending on what is happening. So bullying technically isn't illegal as of yet, because trying to prove that you work in a toxic bullying atmosphere is just really tough to prove. It's just hard. Um, Harassment, on the other hand, is illegal. And like I said, it includes race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, genetic information. Those are all things. But enough bullying can lead to harassment, and that can become a legal issue.
Okay. So
Okay.
where is the fine line with that? Like when was there at any point where it seemed playful at first? You're like, I didn't really understand what was going on. That it intensified to the point where things become harassment. Like where's that fine line? Because I really don't know.
So for me, it was immediate, crossed over into just bullying.
Mm-hmm.
There was no easing my way into it. Now, say you are friends with a coworker, just office buddies or whatever, and this person comes over and they start touching you on the shoulder or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes you a little bit uncomfortable, and you tell them, and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know," and they continue to get a little bit more aggressive with it or something. That at that point, that's harassment. Um, what I've seen in environments that include bullying, it can start off as just teasing somebody. And I've been in those environments too. I remember working a long time ago for a company in Utah, and my manager would tease me. And I asked him not to. He made fun of my name. And I asked him not to, but he didn't listen. And he continued to do it. And it got worse. Like he not only would he not stop, but he would continue to do it. And eventually I just ignored him and just continued on my day. But I would consider that bullying. Now, had he continued to do it more intensely and brought my gender into it, or like as it became more aggressive, that could have become harassment. But at that point, that was just bullying. But teasing incessantly is definitely bullying. And the line is hard. The line
Yeah.
is gray. Um, and I think that leads into, how do you protect yourself? If you feel like you're being bullied, if you take a look at your atmosphere and realize, you know what, I think I am a victim of workplace bullying, there are things you can do. Even though it's not illegal, there are some natural consequences that happen with bullying. One is people leave, good people leave. Okay. So that's kind of an effect of capitalism, right? So you don't like what's happening, you don't shop there or whatever, the stocks drop. So that's kind of like a natural flow, like ebb and flow of things. Um, Now, I think it's really important to notate what's going on. When you suspect you're being bullied, write down, take a little notebook, write down the incidents, write down the days, keep notes of all of these things. Um, and if you can, talk to your HR department. Um, if you have, if you feel like maybe your boss is just going through something and this is like a one off thing, you can always try to talk to them. However, I caution on that because in my experience, they get a little annoyed that you don't like their behavior and it intensifies.
Mm.
So make sure that you have a good relationship. And if you don't feel comfortable talking to them, don't do it. Talk to the person above them, go and talk to HR. That's what HR is for. Any good HR person is going to listen to you. That's their job. And show them, say, these are the days, these are the instances where I felt disrespected, where I felt bullied. Um, Now, along those lines, there are the people who are going to say anything, kind of cry wolf, right? So if you're in a work environment where somebody is always trying to get other people in trouble, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about somebody who is just always causing problems so that they can look better and so that they have something to complain about. Those people know who they are, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people, good people who are just going to do their jobs and they want to feel respected, and they are not getting that because of whatever is going on in the environment. So those are a couple of things that you can do. Definitely educate yourself on your state's workers' comp laws. Go to your HR, see if you can learn a little bit. Say, yeah, I'm in Illinois. What what's happening here? Like, what are my options? I know Washington State now, their laws have changed. I think they call it L&I up there,
Mm-hmm.
and so they do things differently than California does. California does things differently than Utah does. Investigate and learn about your state's workers' comp laws, what it does include, what it doesn't include. Learn about your long-term disability, your short-term disability. Educate yourself. Go talk to your HR people and have them train you and give you the tools to be self-aware and empowered, because that's the biggest drawback to, or that's the biggest issue that most employees face, is they don't know their options. They don't know their choices. Educate yourself, because the more educated you become, you're going to be less of a victim, because you're going to have more power and you're going to know what your options are. I guarantee enough people who get fed up with toxic work environments, they just up and leave. Eventually, the higher ups will notice.
Yeah.
Somebody has to notice. I think that person is actually still working there, but from what I hear, it's high turnover. And
So, I mean, that's incredible to me that somebody
mhm,
like that, who is a known abuser, has done it before, keeps their job. Like, what kind of ridiculousness is that? I mean, what kind of
I don't
expense?
know.
That person has to be so good in so many other areas that you have to, or the only person that'll tolerate that role for the pay or something, that it just doesn't make sense to me. But let me ask you this. So now that you're kind of more of a professional in the HR realm, right? What do you think the future holds for combating workplace bullying and harassment? Aside from just this, like a video. Here's a video. Here's a silly video. Watch. Everybody has to watch the video, and everybody kind of laughs at it because a lot of times they are a little quirky or old or not necessarily realistic. But that being said, like outside of that, where do you see things going? Do you think more states are going to adopt what California and potentially Washington have done, or do you feel like that's still going to be an outlier 5 years from now?
That's a hard one. It's hard to tell because each state is so different and their priorities are so different. So unless somebody brings it to the forefront and says, I want to do something about this, I don't think they're naturally going to adopt it, especially given the political dynamics between red and blue states. Um, Having said that, within private organizations, like I said, there are natural consequences to toxic environments. And at some point, if somebody wants to become profitable and stay marketable and have a good reputation, say on Glassdoor, or they want to recruit the best talent, they're going to have to pay attention to what's going on. I mean, if they don't, then they're sinking their own business. So I have a couple of statistics here. Um, this is from the Workplace Bullying Institute as of 2021. 30% of people who were talked to have direct experience being bullied. That's up from 50% from 2017. 43.2% is the bullying rate for those doing remote work, which is kind of amazing. Targets have 67% chance of losing a job they love when targeted for bullying. And public support for new law goes beyond non-discrimination laws is strong. 90% of people polled, they want legislation. They want something that identifies bullying in the workplace and making it illegal. A couple of other statistics: women bully women at twice the rate that they bully men.
Incredible.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't surprise me, honestly. It doesn't surprise me.
It really doesn't.
I think I've seen it too. But I think the same dynamics that play out in real life also play out in the workplace, right? But arguably, it's unacceptable in the workplace, right? Like we should be able to go and be safe, right? It's not like going to the 7-Eleven in Compton where, hey, the neighborhood's a little bit suspect. We're talking about a professional environment here, right? Where you should feel like, hey, I'm going to get treated professionally and I'm going to treat people and reciprocate professionally. That
Right.
should be what happens. But a lot of times people bring in all that stuff from home and the way that they were raised and the way that they think and the way that they, view the world, understandably, and they bring that into a workplace environment. But when it comes to how you interact with other people in the workplace, I mean, I do agree there should be some amount of protection for people because again, I go back to, I've seen this in real life happen. I've been on these calls where I've actually addressed it with people. I said, hey, you're not going to talk to people on our team like that. And you're not going to talk to me like that. And so I 100% agree.
There's a video out there. I should see if I can find it and send it to you. But it starts out with a kid getting up in the morning and yelling at his dad. Then the dad gets in the car and yells at somebody on the phone. And the person on the phone yells at somebody, and it keeps going. And it all comes back to the teacher who teaches the kid. So it's like this whole spiral of people yelling at each other and this whole circle. I remember seeing that one time, but that is true. You start out by getting mad at people, and then it just goes right down the line. And we have to find better ways to cope with stress. We have to find better ways to talk to each other. We have to find better ways to listen. I think listening and understanding is part of it. You asked my opinion on what can be done. I think a lot of it is up to the corporations and the private entities to take responsibility. But I think HR managers have to step up and toe a line. I think they have to actually do what they're being paid to do and stick up for the employees as well as the operations that hire them. I think too often maybe HR people get a little bit settled and comfortable in what they're doing, and they're afraid to take a stand. And it's not our job to inflict any type of consequences, but it is our job to listen and to try and make change wherever possible and make suggestions. And I think that we need to step up and do a better job of that. And people need to be aware. They need to be informed. They need to take responsibility and educate themselves as to what laws are in, what is available to them for help. I looked up a couple of laws, and here's just a couple of examples. So California now requires workplaces with 50 or more employees to have abusive conduct training as part of existing state mandated harassment prevention training. Tennessee passed a healthy workplace bill in 2015 that encourages employers to adopt anti-bullying policies. In 2020, Puerto Rico passed the House Bill 306, which is the act to prohibit and prevent workplace harassment. And Utah, my state, passed a law in 2015 requiring its state agencies to train supervisors and employees on ways to prevent abusive conduct. So it is happening. It's happening slowly, and it's happening because the squeaky wheel gets the oil, or whatever that phrase is. So it is happening slowly but surely. People are realizing that this is super important for, economic reasons, for mental reasons. If you want good workers, treat them well. And if you need to remove somebody, remove somebody. Don't let your business suffer because you're willing to put up with somebody who is just not good for the company. I don't care how good of a salesperson they are. If they're cussing out people, what are they saying to your customers behind your back? There are things that you have to take into consideration when you're weighing, okay, do I keep this person or do I lose these 5 people? I think people need to think more seriously about that and take these investigations and these complaints more seriously and realize what can happen as a result of having a toxic work environment.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for so much for coming on here and sharing your story, and then also sharing with us some wisdom of ways that had this happened differently for you, if it had been remedied, you probably would still be in California, probably still doing a great job for that company the way you were.
Probably
and
on
it's
a
just
beach.
Unfortunate. Probably on a beach. There's no beaches in Utah, are there?
No, we got to make our own. I do want to close with a couple of resources in case anybody does want
Excellent.
to research a little bit more. Some of my sources were Workplace Bullying Institute. That's the workplacebullying.org, the Cyber Smile Foundation, and Stop Bullying Now hotline. They can look those up, and those are some of the sources that I used. But just for all of your listeners, it's not something you have to put up with. And really, your sanity is most important. And if you do so many things and it's still not changing, go somewhere else. Go find somewhere else. Do something else. Don't be afraid to try something else. You do not have to be stuck in that situation. Your health and your sanity and your mental well-being are more important than what you're putting yourself through every day. And that there is a way out. I know that there is. I've been there. I've done it. So don't be depressed. You don't have to live every day like this. You have options, and I just want them to know that.
Excellent. Well, if anybody wanted to find you or connect with you, Kristi, where would they do that? Is there a good place?
They can find me on LinkedIn. Kristi Chaney is my name, and I work for PZ Printing, which has a fun spelling. It's PECZUH. We're a great little printing company here in Utah. But yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out to Troy. He has my information too. So
absolutely. I'll point you in the direction. Well, I want to thank you listeners for sticking around and listening to the whole podcast. I'd also like you to hit that like button if you enjoyed the content and or the conversation, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. All right. We'll see you next week. Take care.